We will hear about al-Razi's great exegesis. Can text reuse detection solve a long-standing debate over his sole authorship? Sohaib Saeed will present. He's part of the Global Quran Project at Freiburg University, and I think also of the KITAB project. So we're excited to hear your presentation, Sohaib.
Hi, thanks a lot, Irene. Thanks to all the organizers for putting this together, for everyone attending. I'm not formally part of the KITAB project, but that's the most relevant affiliation I could mention here, because what I'm going to share is based on the privilege I had amongst other researchers from a few different disciplines to make some use of the technology in the KITAB project. I hope that many of you have heard about KITAB before, and you can certainly hear more about it today. Although I'm not the best person to present the background to the project and how it works, we do have quite a few Kitabis, as they like to call themselves, in the audience, and I'm sure that they'll be of help if there are questions that I can answer. So, the question that I have pertains to this book. This is my very not digital copy of it, which I'm going to show you some of the issue with regards to a question over its authorship. This is typically known as the Tafsir of al-Razi. Some copies have that emblazoned on the binding like this, but it remains to be seen whether there are some other people involved in the authorship. One of the core problems we have is that there is no critical edition of this work. All of them are reproductions, copies and pastes, including the digital editions we have online. All of these attribute the whole of the text to Fakhruddin al-Razi, who died in 1210. Scholars generally assume that the whole work is his. So, for example, in one study, there was a particularly misogynistic explanation given in Surah al-Rahman, which, as I pointed out to the author, should probably be attributed to someone else. So much as it is a problem, it is someone else's problem and not that of Fakhruddin al-Razi. So this author, whom I tend to call pseudo-Razi, is sometimes named with one or another name, which I'll show you in due course. We do find that this claims some statements in early biographies which do get a mention in some contemporary works and some current works as well. And sometimes those claims are dismissed, whereby the biographer said al-Razi did not complete his tafsir, that so-and-so may have done a tatimma or takmila, a completion of the tafsir of al-Razi, namely Shamsuddin al-Khuwayi, and namely also al-Qamuli. These are names that are dropped. But you find that some scholars, again in the current time, dismiss those claims and say, well, the whole of the text seems to read from a single author, and any small anomalies should be put down to some editing processes that took place. Now, the question or the issue that has arisen for me is that I've been commissioned to translate parts of al-Razi's great exegesis. So volume 1 I already did, and volume 1 is not in doubt. But the selection volume of surahs that were chosen for me includes Surah 36, Yasin, and that is one of the surahs that has been identified as perhaps belonging to a different author. So this becomes a very urgent problem for me. How do I go about labeling this when the translation is published? Furthermore, if I or anyone should be able to produce a critical edition, what do we do about these parts which are by pseudo-Razi? So again, a very undigital approach that I took yesterday. I took a pen to my copy just to show you the 3 putative inserts. So the one on the right here, that's insert 1. And then there's the white pages are accepted to be Razi's. And then the yellow, which here crosses over from one volume to the other, is insert 2, the largest of the inserts. And then there's a small white space, again returning to Razi, and then the red is insert 3, as I'll be calling it in this presentation. Now, this is another recent publication, a monograph about the Tafsir of al-Razi, or Razi as a Mufassir, where, again, the question of authorship is dismissed very casually, I would say. That recent scholarship has shown that Mafatih al-Ghaib was authored by Razi himself. Needless to say, I don't agree with this assertion that modern scholarship has shown this. Now, down below, you can see a mention of Gramlich, a German Orientalist, who was responding to some evidence brought out by Jacques Jomier. But all of this footnote does not give you actually the extent of the evidence that Jomier drew upon. And in actual fact, I had really not realized how rich Jomier's investigation was until after doing my own work on manuscripts. So you know that feeling when you're scooped by German or French Orientalists, sometimes from previous centuries, but this time from the late 1970s, I was scooped by Jacques Jomier. He saw most of the manuscripts that I've looked at, but I'm going to show you the most interesting and attractive of them anyway. And there's no mention here of Abdurrahman al-Muallimi, who has written perhaps the most detailed thing and most significant investigation in the early part of the 20th century. So Muallimi has written an essay which we can find in a collection, Majmur, published in 1996. I'm not sure of its publication history and whether it was circulating freely before that, but at least we have it now. In this essay of his, he's argued for 3 inserts. I'm slightly recasting the way he put it, but this is his point, that there are 25 surahs in the tafsir, amounting to around 11 or 12%, which are by another author. So that goes from Surah Al-Ankabut up to and including Yasin, and then again from Muhammad or Al-Qital up until Al-Waqi'ah, and then again from Al-Mumtahana until Al-Tahrim. So the parts before all of this and the parts after it and the parts in between are accepted as being al-Razi, sometimes because we have, the author has indicated dates, and there are things that are very consistent with his authorship of it, his reference to his other works, and so on. Now, Muallimi was not looking at manuscripts. Of course, he was not using digital methods. He was looking first at what he called ruh, the usloob of the text, the stylistic features which he details in his paper in a very useful way. He was looking also at how the authors were referring to their sources. So, for example, he says that in the part which we accept to be from al-Razi, when Zamakhshari is mentioned, he is called Sahib al-Kashaf, and in some of these parts, he is called Qala al-Zamakhshari. So there are small differences in style which give a clue to there being a difference. Dates are part of the investigation, cross-references, because in these parts which are considered to be inserts, there are some strange references perhaps to people who are subsequent to al-Razi, and he couldn't have been quoting from them. There is, just now I was looking again, and there's a delightful little quote where the person who's supposed to be al-Razi is saying, "On this point, we leave it to the mutakallim and the usuli. It's not for the mufassir." And of course, al-Razi was an imam in kalam and usul, so would not have been so self-deprecating in this way. There are numerous things like third-person references to al-Razi himself. Someone is saying, "I've seen this in the writing of al-Razi, and I think it's good. It's a great point." So it's somebody else who's written this. Incongruous details. So these are all things which have been noted even before the use of digital methods. Now, al-Muallimi in his conclusion attributes the whole of these inserts to Shamsuddin al-Khuwayi, who died in 1239, and apparently had some kind of tutelage under al-Razi, maybe in a minimal way. Earlier in his text, he mentions Qamuli as well, so there's something strange in his essay where at the end he just says it's all Khuwayi, but earlier on he agrees with what a lot of people have said, that there may be 2 contributors. So then it's the question of whether al-Razi completed it and parts were lost, or whether he simply did not complete it and then others came and added these parts. So this is the most attractive example of the manuscripts that I can show you, where insert 1 is in a number of manuscripts very clearly marked out. I think I actually skipped one slide where I've summarized the manuscript evidence. So I approached manuscripts with obviously the need to check my translation work. But then, as many of you will know, there has been a big outpouring of digitized manuscripts coming out of Turkey in the past year. And that coincided with my own needs. So my thanks go to all those who have been involved in digitizing those manuscripts and sharing them. That raises lots of questions about how we're using them and so on. But insofar as they're available, I've been getting any copy of Tafsir al-Razi that I could get. I've been particularly interested in finding the oldest copies to see if there's something, what I was calling smoking guns, where it would be just maybe even just the paper is different in this section, or the handwriting changed. In the oldest manuscript, some clue that there was there's more than one authorial hand involved. I did not expect something so explicit as what I found, and as I told you, Jomi had already talked about it decades before, but I was looking for subtle things and found very blatant references. And this manuscript, I won't give you the exact details of it right now because I'll have to publish this, but this is a manuscript pretty much 1 century after the death date of al-Razi. So at this time, you have some copies which are as clear as this in saying, and this is the end of Al-Qasas and the beginning of Ankabut. It says, from here, this tafsir is authored by, and then a lengthy title for Shamsuddin al-Khuwayi, and then this is some biographical information about al-Khuwayi. And then the end of insert 1, we have, this is the end of al-Khuwayi's contribution, and that's also the end of the particular volume, or the proper word for volume here. So there you have a very clear, explicit marking of this copy, which I believe the dating is fairly reliable to say it's 1 century after al-Razi. However, not all copies from this time are like this. So there's going to be questions to follow up on as to why some are like this, some are not like this, the lineage of these manuscripts, the regions that they were produced in, lots of things that, for if someone wants to fund a big project, then I'll give you a detailed proposal for it. So some of them are attributing Ankabut onwards to Khuwayi, and not all of them say Ankabut to Yasin. Some of them just say from here is Khuwayi's, and they don't specify an end to that. In terms of the other inserts, there's no explicit mention of them in that way. And that is something that gives pause for thought. However, there are some editions. So basically, these are manuscripts, but at the same time, the work that was involved in it is the work of an editor. That's why I'm not sure I want to call this person a scribe or an editor, because this is someone who was comparing a lot of different manuscripts and giving the same kind of notes we would expect from an editor in the modern times. So in the 1760s, there is one which attributes insert 2 to al-Qamuli. And this editor says that they have seen earlier copies which indicate this. And he also says something about the style again. But it's not clear exactly why insert 2 is attributed to Qamuli. I don't see any mention there of insert 3. And as you might recall from the image that I showed you before, the insert 3 is a very thin line, a red line as it was in my copy. But I'll show you this again. I did, however, find one copy with a smoking gun for insert 3. And I'll show you how that works. So, long story short, we have got here the end of the tafsir of Surah Al-Hashr. Surah 59. So the next one should be Al-Mumtahana 60. But instead it just says, oh, that's not here. And in the margin, it's just said, okay, this is not in this volume, it's somewhere else. You know, these surahs are missing. And coincidentally or not, they correspond exactly to insert 3. And this is significant because it's not on a separate page, it's in the same page. A copyist has presumably just dealt with what was in front of him or her and just carried on straight from 59 to 67. So that's one that Jomi actually did not notice, so that's something for my own publication. Right, so now we come to the text reuse. So the KITAB project is based upon this text reuse technology, which is passim. And this visualizer is something that they have developed a bit more recently. You might have seen within the KITAB blog, it's started to make an appearance. But this was the main thing that I was interested to use, because I want to see the book spread out in front of me, and I want to just see any anomalies when it comes to these inserts. Now, in this picture, I'm actually, al-Razi is not here. What we have is al-Baydawi's Tafsir. So al-Baydawi is a little later than Razi and uses al-Razi. And the Kashaf of Zamakhshari is one of al-Razi's main sources. And it's very well known that Baydawi also used Zamakhshari heavily. So this illustration just helps you to see how the chart works here. The visualizer is showing us where there is resemblance between, let's say for simplicity's sake, that each vertical line is like a page. It's actually a 300-word chunk. But if you think of it like a page, then where a page holds a lot of resemblance to another page, you have a long red line. So a lengthy red line means a lengthy piece of resembling text. Of course, resemblance is not enough to establish reuse and lineage and copying, but it is one of the factors that definitely play into establishing a lineage between two texts. So this is exactly what you would expect between Baydawi's Tafsir and Zamakhshari's. We have here, Baydawi is shorter than Zamakhshari's. I actually did not realize that, so that was quite interesting to see so plainly like this. And you've got resemblances that are, these golden lines are showing which bits are corresponding with which bit. So as we expect in the nature of this work, the start is corresponding with the start, the middle is corresponding with the middle, the end is corresponding with the end, because it's going in the order of the Quran. So this is the beginning of the Quran, this is the end of the Quran within these commentaries. Now in Tafsir, there is potentially, there are some issues that we would face specific to Tafsir, and I'm noticing that as I dig into the reuse, which is even things like just when they quote the ayat, when they quote the verses under discussion, that can show up as a resemblance. Despite that problem, the results came out to be quite striking and quite evident in support of these inserts. So let's see the first example of this. So in terms of Razi's sources, we have got here the Kashaf of Zamakhshari that we just saw, and we're looking at how al-Razi is related to his source, Zamakhshari. And as you look across, there are some quite evident bald patches, if I may say, and the most striking gaps are clearly here and here, which correspond closely to insert 1 and insert 2. Now, this bar that I've placed above it, this is from me actually, this is like theoretically where the differences, where the inserts should be. So in creating that, it's a little bit rough, there's some margin of error. So why is there not an exact correspondence between them? That needs some fine tuning. But here with Zamakhshari, you can see first of all, volume 1 of Tafsir al-Razi is also a bald patch, and that should be expected because volume 1 is very different in Razi's Tafsir anyway. It's not actually following the normal pattern of Tafsir. There are some various patches along the way, but then the most evident ones here are at insert 1, insert 2. Insert 3 does not really show up. It could be said that this actually supports Muallimi's thesis, because Muallimi says that the third insert looks like somebody has been in a hurry and pretty much just copied from the tafsirs of Zamakhshari and al-Wahidi. So according to Muallimi, there should be heavy use of Zamakhshari here. So it doesn't surprise me, let's say, that we don't see a third gap. Also, it might be hard to discern just because of how small this gap is. So that's the best visualization. It's not going to get better than this one. So enjoy this one, and the others are slightly more complicated. This is al-Wahidi. So there's a few issues. I didn't discuss this before with the Kitabis actually, so I'm throwing out all the issues here. It should be al-Basit fi Tafsir, which is what I've downloaded, but then it's showing up as Wasit here, so that's for some reason. But I think that the text is the Basit, which is the longer tafsir the longest one written by al-Wahidi. Also, we have to ignore everything from the middle here in al-Wahidi, because this appears to be, it's like the footnotes of the edition have sort of shown up here in the system. So that's maybe a bug to look at, or something to do with the way I used it. So if we ignore that, then we have a much more expected set of correspondences in order with the Basit. And we've got a number of gaps, but insert 1, insert 2 seem to be among the clear gaps. Does this suggest that even in this part, which was al-Razi, that al-Razi himself was not using Wahidi for this portion? Why not? Questions to explore another time. On the flip side, I wanted to see what about people who were using al-Razi's tafsir. So famously, Baydawi relied upon Zamakhshari, al-Razi, and al-Raghib al-Isfahani. So assuming that to be the case, I looked at this pattern, and let's say the insert 2 does seem to be a fairly evident gap. Insert 1, less so. Insert 3 seems to be a possibility as well. Now, the issue here is, I was excited about this at first, but then I asked myself a serious question. If it's based on resemblance, and if al-Razi is not resembling Zamakhshari, then Baydawi would not resemble al-Razi at these points, right? So that doesn't mean what I would hope it would mean, that, for example, Baydawi's copy, because he was in the century following al-Razi, that his copy may not have had, al-Razi's tafsir, or he was aware, perhaps, that this part was not written by al-Razi, so I'm not that interested in it anyway. Why do I want to listen to Khuwayi? I'm just looking at Razi. So those are possibilities, but this data so far does not establish that, because much more digging is needed. Just another case of a heavy user of al-Razi is Nisapuri, Gharaib al-Quran. And again, one might argue that there's some boldness here, insert 1, and a clearer boldness, insert 2, maybe insert 3. But he is already a little bit later, he's died around 728. So I don't know whether to expect that the text was still unstable at his time, or whether it had stabilized into one corpus. But this is one of the ways that we can tease into those questions, along with manuscripts. So to conclude, based on what I've looked at so far, and it really is the beginning of the investigation in the digital side of things, the inserts 1 and 2 are, do appear more likely when you add this general quantitative kind of analysis, this visualization of it, to the evidence that's already been noted by scholars before, such as al-Muallimi. What's needed is further manuscript procurement, further study of the manuscripts, looking into their lineages and so on, and finding the early ones especially. Closer look at the reuse, and the tool itself allows us to go into a qualitative approach and to look specifically at these connections, which is something that would take some more time and care. To compare more sources using this tool, if someone could find the Tafsir of al-Qadi Abdul Jabbar, that would be very helpful. If you could do that, please, and get it into the Open ITI. Until then, there's not so many sources that we can look at. And if we can find other people who used al-Razi, even perhaps before Baydawi, then we could get closer to that question. Finally, and this is not something that I'm doing, but others are working on, something they sometimes call author fingerprinting. That would be a very, this would be a great case study for it. And one of the things that people have started to do in a couple of publications in English and also Japanese, if I recall correctly, is starting to compare parts of Razi's tafsir with what we have of the writings of al-Khuwayi. So by comparing that, we could also establish these, if these are inserts, are the inserts belonging to Khuwayi or any particular theory that we might suggest. So I'll end here and I'll welcome your questions.